there's a machlokes as to whether when you're collecting for aniyim in general, whether you're allowed to take some of that for yourself if you qualify as an ani. Some say you are allowed to, and other poskim say you're not allowed to. I guess unless you would reveal to the people that you're collecting from that you're included, Okay, it's just, here we go. Okay, let's go on to Zion. Adam nichbad gabay tzedakah. So if there's a person who's in the community who already has a sterling reputation as being a person who goes and collects tzedakah on behalf of the poor, shehit parsem kerodev tzedakah v'chesed. He's already well known in the community as a person who pursues charity and kindness. Hamatrim sikumim gdolim l'tovat aniyim l'shem shamayim. He goes ahead and he collects large amounts from donors. He does it really l'shem shamayim. He's not doing it, let's say he collects for a particular organization, and just like that's his passion project. Ulalo kabbalas pras, and he doesn't do it for any recognition or any reward. The yored minachasa ve'eno lefarnes es b'nei beso. If God forbid such a person now has a change in fortune and he can no longer support his family, l'chol hadeot asur lo lakachad la'atzmo. He says in that situation he would not be allowed to take from the kuppah for himself. In other words, he's already been well known as never touching a penny of the tzedakah that he collects. He gives 100% of it to the poor. So because of a pattern that he's already established, everyone would agree that that kind of individual is not allowed to take the tzedakah money that he has raised, even though he needs it for himself. V'yesh bazeh mishum gnevas das habrios. And the truth is that there would be a certain deceptiveness if he were to take, even though he's a good man, right? Mishum shenostim lo betur gabay neman hadoeg rak la'acherim. And the reason is because up until now he's established a pattern that he only accepts gifts for others, and he's doing this purely altruistically without any personal gain. So for him to shift gears without informing the public would not be an acceptable position to take. Unless it was publicized to everybody that now, Yankel, the fundraiser, is now collecting for himself, right? And furthermore, there may be even actual thievery involved, because maybe the whole reason that people give him large sums of money is because they know that he's distributing it to others. But were they to know that he's taking a big chunk of it for himself, they wouldn't have given those large sums. They would give him, but they wouldn't give him the large sums that they normally give, because they know it's going to the public. And so one has to be. So even though we mentioned before that there is an opinion that would allow a tzedakah collector to take some of it for himself, but that's only if he hasn't already established a pattern of doing it, altruistically and just for others. He can't shift if he's already established a public persona as being the guy who just does chesed. Okay? And I think I may know of certain situations that are like that, where the person who was doing chesed all the time, lost his business, and it does happen. I know a guy who publicly donated at a fundraiser $1 million, and then his whole business blew up and he needed financial help. It does happen, unfortunately. And in those kinds of situations, if that person was being the person who would be doing the fundraising, then he would have to disclose to the public, this is for me. I'm doing a fundraiser for me. He wouldn't be allowed to just carry on as usual. Okay,
You guys drive around. You mentioned something.
we talked about that yesterday. We talked about yesterday how much of a cut is a person collecting tzedakah allowed to take for himself. That was the subject of yesterday's discussion. And there are certain practices where the drivers take a third. And he actually acknowledged that that was common practice to take a third. What? Yeah, it's been done for, yeah, it's been going on for a long time. I personally think that that's an abhorrent practice. I think it's wrong, and yeah, 33 and a third. Yeah, it's a big chunk, and that's the reason why anyone who goes around with a driver, I usually just give a minimal donation. Give them $1, $5, whatever it is, but I won't give them any larger donations because I feel that the drivers are, first of all, you're supporting a driver with every dollar that you give. You're letting him buy his Lexus or whatever he's driving, and to me it just doesn't make sense, and it's not an efficient way to run a chat to use your charity. In other words, we work and we work hard and we want to be able to do mitzvahs with our money. That's not a good efficient way of doing mitzvahs with your hard-earned income. There are much more, like one of the things that we learn from all of this is that a person should try to exercise wisdom and discretion in how he's going to give away his hard-earned tzedakah money. And to me, that just doesn't make sense. So. Yeah, every charity has overhead. I shouldn't say every. There are some charities who claim that every single penny goes to the orphanage or whatever it is, because the people who are working for the organization do it purely on a voluntary basis. But that's extremely, extremely rare. As a general rule, to be able to successfully run a nonprofit organization, you need to hire people to be able to run the nonprofit business. To be able to monitor where the money's coming from, to be able to issue charitable receipts, to do the bookkeeping, to go out and wine and dine donors, and so forth and so on. And you just can't do it. But there does come a point where the charity is so self-indulgent that it becomes no longer palatable to be able to donate. When I was living in LA for many years, there's a particular charity that does good work, but every single day, two of the directors of that charity were at Pat's for lunch. You know what Pat's restaurant is in LA? It's the high-end restaurant. So there they are. They're having their steaks and their special dishes and stuff like that. And usually they're with donors and things like that. But a lot of times they were just by themselves. And you say to yourself, look, these guys are raising millions of dollars for a very high-profile charity. But at the same time, the amount of money that they're going through in order to raise that kind of money is huge. So I'm not in the stratosphere as far as being a donor of, but even if I was, what would I want to give to an organization that is so self-indulgent, So yeah, exercise wisdom in how you, and how you give and how you make your donations. That's all. Okay. 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 Ches. Rabim mimostos haTorah v'hachesed regilim lahagzim b'nogea lemispar hatalmidim o mispar hanitmachim al yadam. There are many charities that are involved with Torah and Chesed, whether they're an educational institution or whether they're a charitable institution like a soup kitchen. And they have a habit of exaggerating their numbers to the public. They'll say, we feed 10,000 people a day, when in reality, they're only feeding 875 people a day. Or they'll say, we have 700 students, when they really only have 32 students, or even if it's just a mild exaggeration, right? You know that story about the donor from Chutz La'aretz. Every year, a guy would come to him for the orphanage that he runs, and I would give him. I told him about this orphanage where they had a dozen children that without parents, and they're raising them and teaching them trades and things like that, and every year, he would give a very nice donation to the rabbi who was collecting for the orphanage. And one day, this donor decided, I'm going to go to Eretz Yisrael. This was back in the day when it was hard to get to Eretz Yisrael. I'm going to go to Eretz Yisrael. I want to visit the orphanage. So he looks at the last receipt that he got, and it's an address. He takes a cab to the address, and it's a private residence. Knocks on the door, and there's the rabbi so-and-so, answers the door, and he says, so glad to see you. Where's the orphanage? He says, "Oh, is the orphanage? The orphanage is here." And he sees a bunch of kids running around. He says, "Well, whose children are those?" He says, "They're my children." He says, so the guy says, "But I thought I was giving to an orphanage." He says, "What, you want me to die also?" you know? So, so there is this tendency for charities to exaggerate the work that they're doing, or either the number of students or the number who are supported by their work. Ulam ein lazeh heter barur, but there is no clear heter to do this. I don't even understand why he writes in that language, quoting the Minchas Shlomo. Well, we can look at that in the original tshuva, because there's a whole section in the Sefer that has the actual tshuva. I would say it's usher to do that. It's usher. I don't know why he says there's no clear heter, which implies, well, you never know. Of course, you can't lie to the public about the work that you're doing. But yeah, we just got a building. It'll eventually hold 10,000 students. And we have 3 right now, but eventually, yeah. Okay, obviously there's a tremendous temptation if you're a nonprofit work to exaggerate your numbers. Tremendous temptation to exaggerate your numbers. But you have to remember, it's like any other business. And to misrepresent your numbers and the work that you're doing is Genevas Das. It's like Choshen Mishpat 101, right? So, okay. Gabbai tzedakah, and we know that there's this principle of mitzvah haba'a ba'avera, a mitzvah that is performed by doing an avera. And the Gemara says that mitzvah haba'a ba'avera ain't a mitzvah. If you do a mitzvah by doing an avera, then it's not a mitzvah. That's not, in other words, you have to think about, what does Ribbono Shel Olam want from me? Does he want me to do this holy work that I'm doing? Well, if the only way that I can successfully do it is if I lie to my donor base. Does Hashem really want me to do that? Of course not. When you put it in those terms, there's nothing to talk about. Okay, Tess. Gabbai tzedakah she'asaf mos l'tzarech.
Does that also include a thief who gives tzedakah?
Yeah. A thief who gives tzedakah is not doing a mitzvah. That's exactly right. What do you mean that's part of his profits? Yeah. It doesn't purify the Geneva just because you're giving a portion to tzedakah. Yeah. All right. Gabay tzedakah sha'asaf mos letzorach talmidei chachamim shenimtza b'mitzucha gedola. Aser lo lomar sha'osef lahachnasas kala kedei sheyekabel yoter. If a gabay tzedakah is collecting tzedakah money and truly is doing it altruistically, he's helping out talmidei chachamim who are sitting and learning, but really don't have enough money to support their families, and they're living in abject poverty. And he really wants to help them out. But he figures if I say it's for hachnasas kala, then I'll get much more. Hachnasas kala is to help someone make a wedding, right? And people tend to donate more to that. They know it's a specific thing. It's for a one-time event, right? So there's no heter to do that. There's no heter to. Again, this is simply lying, and there's no heter to lie. In order to be able to collect more tzedakah money. Right, it's from Shevet Halevi. Okay. Al yite adam v'yachshov sheyesh ezet tzad kula lahaziko lignov mamon tzedakah. He says a person should never erroneously think that there's any kind of heter to damage or to steal charity money. He says there are certain situations where once the money has been taken, it cannot be extracted from the person who has taken the tzedakah money. But stealing tzedakah money is no different from stealing from or damaging anyone else's finances. In other words, even to, let's say, to disparage a particular charity, to discourage people from giving to a particular charity, is no different from disparaging a person's business and discouraging people from giving business to that person. Whoever does that is really pursuing someone's livelihood. Like if I were to say, don't use that. Don't use X. His work is no good. So I could do that. To do the same thing for a charity is to discourage people from giving to a charity. Is no different from discouraging people from supporting a private businessman. V'gam yitachen shu chamor yoter, and if anything, it's even worse, right? And unfortunately, this can also happen in the nonprofit world. Is that for various reasons, you could have people disparaging a competing charity. And I've actually experienced this where, I'll ask a particular charity that's a person representing a charity, tell me how you're any different from this other guy that just came to see me last week, and you guys are serving the same purpose. Isn't this a redundancy of work? And they have to sometimes come up with very creative answers to defend their own existence. A lot of times there's redundancy in nonprofit charities, right? We understand that. That also involves, the wisdom that you have to exercise when donating charity. And I actually feel an even greater responsibility because many times I'm using communal funds, the shul's charity fund, to make charitable donations. And while most of it, the lion's share of it, goes to private individuals in our community, once in a while, if we have a surplus, I'll give a gift to someone who comes to a yeshiva in Israel or to a needy, like a soup kitchen in Israel. But when someone comes to me and they say, "Oh, this is the work that we're doing," and I said, "Wait a minute, the guy just came to me last week. They're a much more established charity. They're taking care of thousands of people. And you're taking care of a much smaller demographic. What is your justification in existence if you have this other charity that's..." And so And a lot of times you'll get the kind of answer, well, you don't understand, we have to take care of those people that other charity is not willing to help, and come up with a lot of different creative answers. Um, and you have to really sort of know how to read between the lines and be able to understand what's a song and dance and what's really sincere.
Like private individuals, wealthy private individuals, who started their own grassroots under the radar type of thing, and people understand they're social people, and they're trying to just help out the situation, and they do something too. And
A lot of time there is room for multiple charities. No one's contesting that. No one at all is contesting that. But what I've also encountered is people discouraging you from giving to that other charity because Gemara says, "Kol uman sone b'venu naso." Every artisan resents his competitor, and you never. First of all, you're not even allowed to ask. Let's say a guy who manufactures widgets, and there's another widget manufacturer down the road. You can't say, "What do you think of that guy's work?" Because it's like it's like lifnei iver. You're causing the other guy to sin, because he's naturally going to find something negative about his competitor's work, and so you're not allowed to do that. But when a fellow nonprofit person comes up with some kind of disparaging remark about another competing charity, you're not allowed to do that. And to damage someone else's charity work is absolutely not good. I mean, we had one guy who was trying to convince people not to give to a charity effort that our shul was doing, and that's not good. That's not a good thing. And like he says, it's at least as bad as disparaging someone else's business, right?
Talk comes a little bit about competitors. Is it you can't bring them up at all, or you can't in a conversation with, let's say, somebody who's also doing with, let's say, doing business with you and they're doing business with a competitor, you can't bring it up at all, or you just have to tread a fine line about how you talk about it?
Well, here's the thing. There's halachas of lashon hara, right? We all know that. We all know that you're not allowed to disparage somebody else unless you can justify it as toelis, which means, okay, so you're a dress manufacturer. Somebody, a competitor, and his work is shoddy, and that he mistreats his employees, and that he does some dishonest things with money, and he doesn't take sales tax or whatever dishonest things that he does. If someone were to come to you and say, Ron, I wish I had enough money to afford the dresses that you sell, but I'm going to go to this other guy because his dresses are half the price. So if you feel that the consumer is going to regret buying the dress, you would be allowed to say to them, listen, I think that you'd be making a mistake buying that other person's dress, because I know the quality of the work and you're going to be dissatisfied. And just leave it at that, right? But there's only so much that you can say. You have to sort of know for yourself that the only reason you're saying it is because you want to protect the consumer. If you have to, but it really takes a lot of strength, takes a lot of gevura to be able to determine for yourself that you're not doing it for self-interest. You can say to the person, look, my dresses are out of range for you, and I understand that I don't want you to buy my dresses. But if you need to buy something that's lower end, go to so and so instead of this guy that you're going to, because at least the dresses of so and so, while they're not as good quality as the ones that I sell, but at least you'll be getting a good product. Okay. Okay. So v'lachein ein shum tzad heter lahotzi shelo kedin o ba'arama mima'os tzedaka v'lo yachnis atzmo lechapes tzadei heter. And therefore, there's no heter whatsoever to extract charity money with any kind of deceit. In other words, to be able to cheat a charity. And don't try to find any heterim whatsoever. Now, I'm trying to imagine what scenario he could be possibly thinking about where a person could try to justify deceiving a charity. Okay. Right.
Their responsibility, do you trust it, or do you have to be?
Well, look, you think about it. Every city has a Vad Hatzdaka. The Vad Hatzdaka, or every major Jewish city has a Vad Hatzdaka. The Vad is comprised either of volunteers or an employee who's not getting paid a lot of money. And his job is to either compare notes with another Vad in another city where they have done the investigation. And that's honestly, that's most of the time what the Vad Hatzdaka in Toronto does. They are not involved. In most cases, the Vad Hatzdaka here in Toronto is not doing their own due diligence, but is rather relying on the diligence that is done in let's say, Lakewood, which is probably one of the major centers where they actually investigate the people. But what is the due diligence? The guy comes, he sits down, and he tells the fellow in charge of the Vad, here's my story. I've got 12 kids. One of them needs surgery. I need to marry off one of them. And he gives the story. And the truth is, his story is believable. Is the guy in Lakewood going to fly to Eretz Yisrael to go to his house and check up on him? No. And even if he did, how can you verify any person's status? But you become sort of an expert in human nature after a while. You get a sense of who's telling the truth and who's exaggerating and inflating the situation. Does that mean that they get it right 100% of the time? No. But do they have a fairly good track record? Yes. So the benefit of having a Vad Hatzdaka in Toronto is basically the guys in Toronto are calling the people in Lakewood, or getting an email, or getting a text, or seeing the piece of paper that the guy presented from the Vad in Lakewood, and then they just draw up their own thing that they laminate, right? And the guy who's collecting tzedakah has to pay the Vad Hatzdaka here a certain fee for getting that laminated card, and for the administrative efforts that are being done to allow him to collect. All right, let's go. We got to stop here. Have a great day, everybody.
One quick question, Rabbi. Which Zman are you using for the fast for dawn? What Zman you go by?
Well, we published it in our online.
It's there. Okay, I'll check. Thank you.
Yeah, just go to buyit.ca. Okay.
On the news release, right? The newsletter.
Yeah, either that or just go to buyit.ca. It's on the website.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
Take
Have
care.
a beautiful fast, guys.
You too. Bye bye. We'll just start regular time.